We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Michaela Moss, and I'm the Executive Director for the Friends of the Missouri Breaks Monument. We're a small nonprofit organization based out of Helena, Montana, dedicated to the protection and preservation of the Upper Missouri River Breaks National Monument through stewardship, education, and advocacy. And all this year, our organization and the monument have been celebrating our 20th years. So we've been celebrating our 20th anniversaries this entire year, and beginning in January, we started these Tune In Tuesday events to kind of highlight all of the reasons that the Upper Missouri Breaks are so special. So we've had guest speakers from all walks of life. We've had wildlife biologists, hydrologists, speakers about our organization, about the monument itself, its ecology, wildlife, and it's been really interesting. We took a little time off during our busy field season, but we are now back and gonna continue out through the end of the year with a few more speakers for the rest of the fall. And I'm just gonna let a few more people in. So without further ado, I will introduce tonight's guest speaker. We have Marcus Strange of Montana Wildlife Federation. He is their programs and partnership director. And we've been lucky enough to have Marcus out on a bunch of Friends events. He's a really great, dedicated volunteer. So it's nice to see your face again, Marcus. It's been a little while. Thank you so much for joining us. And just before I hand things over to Marcus to kind of get going and talk to us about hunting in the breaks, I'll just go over sort of the schedule for the evening. I'm going to hand it over to Marcus. He'll kind of go through his presentation. Please feel free to, if you do have questions while he's talking, Marcus, if you want to just go ahead and ask, you can type them into the chat, raise your hand on your Zoom screen, or probably just jump in and ask a quick question. If you would, though, like to wait, we'll have time at the end of the presentation for questions. So write them down, just keep them in the back of your head, and we'll have time to answer all those questions then. I'll also ask that everybody keeps themselves muted. You're doing a great job so far. Everybody I see is muted on the screen. So go ahead and stay muted so we don't have that background noise. And then, but please feel free to turn on your videos. I'm sure Marcus would love to talk to some faces instead of black screens, but if you'd rather leave them off, that's all right too. And with that, I will hand it over to Marcus to go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Michaela. That was, sorry, I'm gonna adjust myself here real quick. That was a great introduction, and I'm thrilled to be one of your speakers. I love these Tune In Tuesdays. They're a lot of fun, and I recognize a few people from past ones, so this is fun, kind of bringing it full circle. I will say I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. Michaela knows from me volunteering, I tend to lose my train of thought sometimes. So the thing that works best for me if you want to ask a question is the chat, or this really nifty little yellow hand thingy that you can find down in the bottom. If you do either one of those, I will finish my thought and then circle back to whatever question you have. And that seems to keep me on track and make sure that I don't get confused, because that's easy to do with me sometimes. So I think what I'll do actually is just move into the presentation. So I'm going to share my screen. See, there we go. Okay. All right, so I threw this together this week, so if you see typos, I'd also like to know about those, because I'd love to repurpose this for a future presentation. So yeah, feel free to flag those. I am going to do a couple of things. I'm going to introduce myself in a little greater detail so you know who I am and why I'm qualified to talk about hunting in the breaks. I want to share a little bit about the organization that I represent, because we are passionate defenders and allies of the Upper Missouri River Breaks National Monument. Share some of the key issues that we work on across the state, and then talk about hunting in the breaks. So this is me. I've been with the Montana Wildlife Federation since 2017. Prior to that, I had a career actually in law enforcement, and then I worked for the state of Montana doing some programmatic and communications work in the education department. In my time with the Montana Wildlife Federation, I've served as the Central Montana Field Representative, and in that capacity, one of my campaigns was defense of the Missouri River Breaks Monument. If you remember back to 2017, 2018, there was a national effort to roll back monuments, and I was part of the campaign to make sure that the breaks stayed a national monument. Currently, as Michaela shared, I am the Programs and Partnership Director. I work on statewide public policy, and I do government relations, or as most people know, the dirty word, lobbying. So I work with legislators, both at the state level and the federal level, to make sure that we have good relations so that we can get quality public policy work done. I am, as you see in that final bullet point, I'm an adult onset hunter. So I didn't start hunting until I was 27, actually. It wasn't something that my folks did growing up with us. I only had one family member who hunted. And so everything that I've learned about hunting, I've learned from friends, from pestering people, from YouTube videos, and from just going out and making all kinds of mistakes on my own. As you can see in this picture, I love traditional archery. That's my favorite form of hunting. And currently I'm looking at building my own muzzle loader and getting into black powder rifle hunting. So basically just trying to create as many hurdles for myself as possible when I go out in the field. I'm not going to read this to you guys. You can kind of skim it as I talk about MWF, but MWF has been around since 1936. We're the state's oldest wildlife conservation organization. We are governed by a board of directors who are Montanans from all across the state. And we have ranchers, former wildlife biologists, both from FWP, Fish and Wildlife Services, and then just wildlife enthusiasts who sit on our board. And our mission is really focused on habitat, access, and quality, healthy wildlife. We've worked in those three areas for all that time since 1936, and we've been involved in some pretty big things. If you're grateful for stream access, we were heavily involved in that. Banning game farms, and then things like the Rocky Mountain Front Heritage Act, so on and so forth. So I encourage you to go check out our website if you want to see some of the things that we've been involved in over years. Current issues that you might be interested in, wildlife focus. And this is, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this because I think it impacts our hunting experience as well as our wildlife watching experience in the breaks. And that is elk management. Feel free to kind of skim through this. I don't feel the need to dive into each one of these, but right now the state is reviewing its elk management plan. There's going to be a lot of changes to the way the state manages elk coming up. I would highly recommend that if you're an elk enthusiast, that you get involved, because there's kind of two sides to this issue. One side wants to see elk remain a public resource where we can hunt it, where we can watch it, we can enjoy it. And the other side is definitely more geared towards privatization. And so we and many other groups are involved in collaborative efforts to organize folks and make sure that what is best for the resource, what's best for the public is done as we move forward. So there's a comment period. You can go to our website for more information. You can go to the Fish and Wildlife Department's website for more information. But the main thing you should all be aware of when it comes to elk and elk in the breaks is there is a public comment period, and they are taking comments about how elk are managed in the breaks. That comment period ends on October 20th, so get your comments in as soon as possible. And if you want to take our elk survey and let us know how you think elk should be managed in the breaks, you can go to montanaelksurvey.com. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about that. Here's some other fish and wildlife issues that we're involved in. Definitely not an exhaustive list, but we work on every level of fish and wildlife management, everything from funding to boots on the ground advocacy work. One thing that I'm really passionate about, and it's something that I've been really pushing, is this last bullet point, using lead-free ammo. I can talk your ear off about that. It's really important, especially in an ecosystem like the breaks, where you have water running downhill and feeding into other water systems. So these are some of the wildlife issues that we work on, and I'm looking at all of these. We probably need to update this list because there's some other ones, but that's good for now. Habitat. Actually, both of these photos are in the breaks. This was on the first float trip I did in the breaks with one of the concessionaires up there. And then this other one is my buddy Casey from the first bow hunt I did in the breaks. Both pretty cool experiences, and probably touch on the bow hunt with Casey towards the end of this presentation. So habitat, landscape specific issues. These aren't the breaks, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about these, but the Blackfoot Clearwater Stewardship Act is something we've been heavily involved in. That is moving forward slowly. If you want more information about that, let's talk offline. The Badger 2 medicine is another campaign that we're working on. That's a fantastic one that, very similar to the breaks, has a cultural component. Just as the breaks has a lot of history, the Badger 2 medicine has an incredible history that we're trying to protect, and that's a cool landscape campaign that we're involved in. The Lincoln Prosperity Act is probably one of my most time-consuming landscape-specific projects I'm working on right now, just because it is moving forward very quickly. We're looking at adding more wilderness to the Bob Marshall Scapegoat Wilderness Complex, which is going to be incredible to be able to expand that. And there's going to be some incredible public access opportunities that come along with this. Other habitat issues that we're working on. Just habitat is key. And as all of you who spend time in the breaks know, it's an incredible ecosystem. It's incredible wildlife habitat. And we really feel strongly that all of our issues that we focus on need to be focused on ensuring that quality habitat is an integral part of that. And then access. Access in the breaks is a really interesting topic. At times it's overwhelmingly abundant, and then at times it's the most frustrating part about hunting in the breaks. Either you don't know where to begin because there's so much acreage out there, and you kind of just have to throw a dart and just go. And then at other times you're like, if I could just get across that little piece of private land, I could get to those elk and things would be hunky-dory. So access is a fascinating thing when it comes to the breaks. But some of the access issues that we're working on specifically are listed here. Let me take a look at those real quick. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, and the reason I want to talk about this is because I'm a really strong advocate for collaboration, and we are fortunate to collaborate with some awesome organizations that are affiliate organization of ours, and the Friends happens to be one of those organizations. So these are our close partners and allies. We work on issues where we have commonality, and we support each other where possible. So if you see one of these local organizations that's close to you, I would highly recommend getting involved with them and lending your voice to fish and wildlife conservation in the state. There's some great organizations out there. Your number one priority obviously should be joining the Friends, and then after that, find your local MWF affiliate, they'd love to have you. All right, hunting in the breaks. So I love hunting in the breaks, and the main reason I love hunting in the breaks is because the opportunity for some kind of wild adventure is boundless. I have never gone to the breaks and not come home with some kind of amazing story, and that doesn't always necessarily mean that I come home to put meat in the freezer, but there's never been a time where I've gone to the breaks and gone hunting where I haven't had something incredible happen. And that's one of the things I love about it. It's a varied landscape in terms of hunting. You have a lot of different terrain to work with, and you have abundant wildlife. So I'm going to, because I am not a waterfowl guy, I'm not a predator hunter, I hunt mostly big game, and most of my time is focused on elk and deer. I do antelope hunt. You guys don't want to learn about antelope hunting from me. I'm just going to tell you that right now. So we're going to focus most of this discussion, just assume when I talk about it, we're talking about elk and deer. So those two species, there's abundant opportunity in the breaks, and we'll dive into both of those here in a second. I wanted to play this video real quick. This was when I was first hired on to MWF. Within a few months, I was asked by the National Wildlife Federation to help make this video. So you're going to see baby Marcus in all of his new conservation-ness, talking about why the breaks are a special place.
The Missouri River breaks looks like a land that time forgot.
Can you all hear that? Nope, that's what I was afraid of. I could tell by the looks on your faces you couldn't hear that. We'll just skip it for now. It's the land that time forgot in defense of national monuments, and it's with NWF Outdoors, if you want to go check it out. It was part of a series of 4 or 5 videos that they did. Very short, they're 1-minute video clips, and there were 2 or 3 in Montana, and then some other ones across the country. But yeah, I apologize that sound didn't work, but you got to see me without facial hair, so that's a victory for all of us. Okay. Sorry, I gotta move you guys for a second. You're blocking my...
That's pretty.
Okay, so let's talk about hunting opportunities in the breaks. Oh, thanks. Thank you for sharing that, Joe. Appreciate that. Hunting opportunities. We touched on this a little bit. I love to elk hunt in the breaks. I love to mule deer hunt in the breaks. A lot of people focus on those, but there's also opportunity for white-tailed deer. Obviously, with it being a river corridor, there's great whitetail habitat, and a lot of people don't think about that when they think about hunting the breaks. Let's see, 2 or 3 years ago, though, we went hunting mule deer, and my buddy shot an incredible whitetail, and I messed up probably the best deer of my life. We were going along this trail, kind of up and down breaky country, headed towards the river, and I saw this whitetail from about 500 yards away down in the bottom of a coulee chasing a doe, and worked my way down, came up and around, and I did such a good job that I popped up 25 yards from him, and I made the mistake that every hunter makes at least a dozen times in their life. I had my scope turned all the way up. So when he popped up at 25 yards and I pulled up at 25 yards, all I saw was dirt through my scope, and he took off, and that was the heartbreak of the trip. So lots of great whitetail opportunity. There's some big whitetail down there. I promise I'm not gonna screw any of you up on antelope, but there is some great antelope hunting in the breaks. antelope hunting in the breaks is going to be most successful if you plan ahead and work with landowners. Most of the antelope that I personally have seen while out hunting the breaks really congregate and spend time on private land. Now, this is a great opportunity because if you can get access to that, you're probably going to be the only person out there hunting antelope. That's not to say that you can't hunt antelope on the public land in the breaks. It's just going to be more challenging because they don't tend to spend the most amount of time there. They like to be in the grain fields. And so it's another piece to that makes it easier for you probably to get access is those landowners want them off of there. They like to congregate and spend time on private land versus the deer and elk that tend to move on and off. So if you're an antelope person and you want to go hunt antelope in the breaks, go out there, take a scouting trip, make note of which landowners have antelope, give them a call, build that relationship. And yeah, it would be cool if that's your thing. The other thing that's great hunting out in the breaks is turkeys, believe it or not. There is an abundance of turkeys in the breaks, and again, pretty close to private land. But if you don't have contacts with landowners or you don't have the time, you can still hunt them on public land. I've seen lots of turkeys on public land. I'll talk about a good strategy for them here in a second. But those are, in my opinion, some fantastic opportunities to go hunting beyond elk and mule deer. Sorry, this computer was my coworker's and he spelled Coke on the keyboard, so sometimes the keys don't work. There we go. Okay. This is a picture of my buddy Casey from my first bow hunting trip in the breaks. As you can see here, just incredible country. That's all public land as far as you can see. It was getting kind of dark, so we were packing up and heading out. But in theory, this spot would have been fantastic to sit in glass all day. Those cuts, those coulees, the timber, all of that makes for an incredible day of hunting. And then this is another trip that I took a few years later with my buddy Brad, and this is probably my most effective thing is just getting up into a high point in the breaks and sitting and glassing all day long. What we were doing here is this is a finger ridge, and so we each were seated on different sides of this ridge, and so we could cover a lot of country. This country all fed down to the river, and so what we were trying to do is we were trying to catch deer as they were coming up. This was pretty early in the morning, and so the strategy, and it's a pretty effective one, is the deer particularly like to go down to the river at night and then come up first thing in the morning, and then vice versa at night. You can catch them coming down. So we were up there. It looks pretty bright just because the photos washed out, but we were there early in the morning watching for deer coming back up. And then this was my vantage point, actually. I feel like I had the better view. But yeah, just incredible country, lots of it. And hunting the river corridor has been very successful. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about the abundance of wildlife as a key point, as a pro for why you would want to hunt the breaks. In my opinion, these are the three main reasons besides the wildlife. I love hunting in places where I have lots of opportunity. I just did a 5-day elk hunt in the backcountry of Southwest Montana where we didn't see a single elk. And that is mentally fatiguing, to say the least. So I like to go where there's lots of opportunity. The great thing about the breaks is because there's so much wildlife, you can do multiple stalks in a day. You can mess up, you can make mistakes, and you can try again in a few hours. This last winter, I went out, this is my buddy Corey signing into this block management right here. It's his first time hunting in Montana, and we just let him make a lot of mistakes, and he made a lot of mistakes. He had 4 or 5 chances a day at different deer, and yeah, there's an abundance of opportunity in the breaks. Access, and that's why I use this particular photo. There's not only public land, but there's a lot of great block management opportunities, as well as landowners who want to get wildlife off of their property. And so whether it's through the block management program, whether it's through building relationships with landowners, or just hunting the public land, if that's what you have the time and the capacity for, there's an abundance of access, unlike any other place in the state, in my opinion. And then finally, the habitat, and I've hit on this a bunch. I just think the habitat in the breaks is one of a kind. It's so cool. It's unique to anything else. You definitely don't get that high alpine experience, but man, you get pretty much everything else that you want out there. And I just love that. I love going, from, one place over here where we're doing one type of hunting, and then driving, a few miles down the road, and it's a completely different experience. Yeah, the habitat is one of my favorite parts of the breaks. This is me back in, I think this is 2019. That was that trip where my buddy shot that whitetail, and that was a fantastic trip. It was very cold, if you can't tell. This is just a photo I wanted to share with you all to kind of illustrate that idea of working with landowners. This is actually on some private property that had been, I don't know if that was alfalfa or hay, I can't remember, but yeah, the deer were in there like crazy. We didn't plan ahead and get permission from this particular landowner, but given the amount of deer, I think if we had had service and could have made a call, he would have been more than happy to have us go on there. So if you can plan ahead, like I said, it's a great way to get into some wildlife. So at some point, this is more information that you need, but at some point I took all my photos and put them on a hard drive, and I didn't realize that while I was putting this presentation together. So this is a screenshot. I apologize, but I really wanted to share this photo for 2 reasons. One, fences can be your friend, or they can confuse the heck out of you. There are fences everywhere in the breaks, and they don't necessarily mean anything, or sometimes they do mean something. So the second part of why I wanted to share this photo is when you go into the breaks, you really need to have some kind of GPS mapping service, whether that's Onyx, Basecamp. Montana FWP has a free program where you can download an app and a PDF version of a map, and the map is geo-referenced so that you can essentially use it like a GPS map. Some way, somehow, whatever your preferred option is, you need to know what the different land ownership types are, because they can change really quickly. The landscape is deceptive. You can cover more ground than you realize in a quick amount of time. And like in this photo, we didn't know what was on the other side of this fence because it took us less time to get to where we were going than we realized. And we were trying to figure out, is this that private property that we saw on the map, or is this just some random fence that hasn't been cleared out from the BLM yet? So it's really important that we want to be respectful of people's personal property. This ended up just being some random fence that was meaningless. So yeah, just find some way to know who owns the land in and around the place where you're going to be hunting. Just some more cool country. Okay, so these are my hunting strategies, and if you hunt a lot, some of these may not be revolutionary revolutionary to you. But these are the things that I found the most impactful, and have given the best results. So when I go into the breaks, I look for quality habitat that butts up against private property. And so many times, I'm thinking of 2 or 3 deer in particular. I have had really good success hunting boundary lines, waiting for deer to come off of private property and making a play on them in that situation. I'm going to share a photo later, but the first deer that I got in the breaks was just that situation. I was on a narrow neck of BLM that fed down into a bigger parcel of BLM, and all around me was alfalfa fields. And I watched the deer in there all afternoon. And then I watched this buck leave some does, and I thought, oh, I'm never going to see him. And he walked right from the private onto the public and walked past me at 50 yards. It's pretty cool. So my number one strategy is find that quality public land habitat where you have access that interfaces with private land. It's incredibly effective. Saddles. I just went into the math on this. 90% of the animals that I have harvested have been on saddles. If you don't know what I mean when I say a saddle, you have a high point, a peak, and you have a high point and a peak over here, and there's a low point in between the two. And animals tend to use those, in my experience, for crossing all the time. And it makes sense. You and I don't want to climb up to the highest part of a ridge. We want to go over at the easiest point, and animals want to do the same thing. So when you're looking on maps, find those saddles. More than likely, that's where the animals are going to cross first thing in the morning, late in the evenings. The last deer, my deer from last year, that's actually where I got him. There was a saddle, and we went and we sat on the ridge across from the saddle, and we just watched deer cross there until we saw him come through, which was pretty cool. Coulees, creeks, drainages. Sorry, I got to move you guys again so I can read that. Oh, the mow. So anywhere where there's water moving through, we have had great success finding animals. That makes a lot of sense because they're looking for water. But more often than not, they're using coulees, dried creek beds, and drainages to maneuver unseen. And so if you can move yourself into a place where you can, see as many of the coulees and the drainages and the dried creek beds as possible, more than likely you'll be able to catch wildlife moving through those. You'll see a picture here of my archery elk from 2017 that I shot in the breaks. That was actually a combination of saddles and coulees. The elk ran out through this meadow and went back into some coulees. They came up over a saddle, and they were trying to drop back down into this dried up creek bed to or timber. So scene is they cross at saddles, and then they travel through coulees and dried creek beds. Can you all hear me and see me? My computer just said my internet connection's unstable.
You're good. You're cutting out a little bit, but you seem okay.
Okay. If it gets bad, please let me know. So one of the things that I really struggle with is what do I do from about 11 o'clock until that golden hour, an hour before things get dark. Like, what do you do in the middle of the day? And the answer is not one that I like because I'm not super patient and I don't like to just sit there, but timber pockets during the middle of the day, especially if you're hunting elk, are really, really effective. And the great thing about the breaks is your timber pockets. It's not like here in Western Montana where it's super thick and you've got to spend a ton of time picking them apart. You have these small timber pockets that are kind of sparse and scattered apart. So you can sit, you can glass, and that's what I would do, especially if you're elk hunting during the middle of the day, because the elk are going to go into those timber pockets. And just be patient, use your optics, sit in glass, look really meticulously through each little shadow. And we've had great success finding elk that way. And that feeds into my second point, glass like your life depends upon it. You know, there's a lot of country out there. You could wear yourself thin, but the most effective thing, at least in my experience, is really spending a lot of time behind your binoculars, behind your spotting scope, and save your energy. Walk less, hunt more. Again, you can walk all over the place. It's not going to be super effective, especially in the breaks. The most important thing you can do in the breaks is be patient, sit, look, listen, see what's going on. And then I just threw this in there because in my experience, if you're willing to walk half a mile to a mile from the access point, you're going to get into wildlife. So what I like to do is I like to identify my access point where I'm going to go into a specific part of the breaks, walk in at least half a mile. Mile is ideal, in my opinion. And then do these other things, sit and glass and watch and look and listen. That gets you away from people, that gets you into security habitat, that gives you a better, more enjoyable, in my opinion, experience of being immersed in the wildness of the breaks. So yeah. Before I move on, any questions on those? I'm going to share some examples. Michaela, don't worry. I know what time it is. I'll adhere to the schedule. Okay, cool. All right, so I shared about this. This was that elk that I talked about where they ran through this meadow, and we knew because we had looked at the map that there was this system of coulees and drainages, and there was a pretty prominent saddle. And we got down to where that saddle was feeding into the drainages, and you can see this creek bottom behind me. It was a dried up creek bed, and it fed all the way down to the river if you followed it far enough. But there was a saddle that also connected into it, and you know, we kind of took a gamble, but it paid off, and we were able to get an elk. This is actually another component that I didn't talk a lot about, but if you can find spots in the breaks that are burned over, that's money too. Wildlife love to go into those burned out pockets because as the regeneration starts, there's, you know, great nutrients in there for them. So this was kind of a perfect storm of all the right components for getting into elk in that case. This was, again, a horribly grainy photo, but this was that deer that I talked about where we had that public land, private land interface feeding from the grain fields down into public. So the way that I'm looking in the photo is back towards the farmland. And then behind me that's all pretty much public land as far as you can see. And so it's just this perfect, public-private interface that I was able to work and use to my advantage. I don't think I have, nope, I don't have a picture of that deer. I wanted to share this, not because the deer wasn't, you know, a trophy deer by any stretch of the imagination in terms of size. But what was so cool about this was just had a fantastic time with my friends, got my buddy his first deer. I got a deer, but what was so cool was as the sun was coming up, we saw this deer. It was the last morning, there was a storm rolling in, and I make my decision about what animal I'm going to take based on that feeling that I get, and is it the right story that I want to have. And so I see this deer, and it's like 400 yards away. And I was thinking to myself, he, you know, he might be a big enough deer. I can't really tell. And I was like, you know what? Forget it. I'm just going to go. Grab my rifle. I didn't even grab my backpack and just started jogging. And you can't see it, but there's some really tall sagebrush off to my right. And as I'm kind of jogging through that, trying to close the distance on this deer, the sagebrush was up to my chest. And all of a sudden I hear the sound, and next thing I know, this herd of bighorn sheep gets up out of the sagebrush and just starts stampeding all around me. So I've got bighorn sheep running around me. I've got deer in front of me. It was a cool story. And in that moment, I was like, this is the story I want to tell. Yeah, was able to bring home a really cool deer. Actually, I don't have him on this wall. I have him on my other wall over there, but it's a cool deer, cool story. And yeah, just a fun time in the breaks. And yeah, we got out before the storm. I almost wrecked the truck on the way out. So all in all, it was a pretty fun trip. This was 2 years ago, and I put this in here because I almost froze to death. And I don't say that hyperbolically, like literally, I was not prepared for how bad the weather was going to be. And it was touch and go for a little bit there. Like I was by myself, was not prepared for the cold weather. And that's not because I didn't check the weather ahead of time. The weather just changed in a day. And that's the reason I put this in here, is to say the conditions in the breaks can change so quickly. It's really important that you are prepared for anything when you go there. Even if it says no rain or no snow, come prepared for rain or snow. Bring more firewood than you think you're going to need. Bring that extra set of gloves. Whatever it is that you think, oh, I'm probably not going to need that, you probably are going to need that. Yeah, this was an incredibly mentally and physically taxing trip, just because I was underprepared for how bad the weather was going to be. And then this was last year, and you can actually see, it's not the best, but this was that saddle that I was talking about. You can't really see how low it drops off on this other side, but it's a pretty significant drop off. So he was coming up this hill, and then if you look off to my left, you can't see it in the photo, but it drops off again. So it's just this perfect crossing point heading down to the river, and we're able to make a good shot on a good deer. Speaking of good deer, I am not a trophy hunter by any stretch of the imagination. Like I said, I hunt stories and I hunt for meat. And that's the other great thing about the breaks, is if you want to shoot monster deer, there are monster deer there, and you can chase them around. If you want to shoot decent deer like this one here, you can do that. If you want to shoot does and put meat in the freezer, you can do that. You get to really kind of choose whatever experience you want to have. And for me, I just love hunting. I'm not hunting for score. I'm not hunting for the biggest deer out there. I wouldn't say no if that happened, but I just like spending time with people outside and tapping into that hunting tradition that we get to enjoy here. So yeah, you definitely will be able to pick whatever kind of experience you want to have when you're out on the breaks. I don't know why I put that in. I just like food processing photos, so I think that's why I put that in there. Yeah, more food processing photos, and then us headed out of the breaks. So yeah, follow MWF on our social media. We share a lot of cool content. And then this is my contact information. And this is probably, I'll leave this up for a second before I stop sharing my screen, but this is probably a great opportunity for some questions. Yeah. Kayla's saying yes. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. If you guys have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask Marcus, or type it into the chat if you're not able to use your microphone. yeah, we definitely have some time for questions if they're out there.
Marcus, do you get stir crazy like going out there and sitting so long? Because I feel like I hunt in the big belts most of the time, and it's, you know, maybe in archery season, I'm hanging out a little bit at first or last light, but generally it's just go, go, go all day. And so like to switch gears, and I don't know, what's that like all of a sudden sitting and glassing for hours?
It's a good question. And I've hunted the big belts as well. It's really cool hunting. So I guess there's two parts to that. One, bring a book. You know, if you are, I'm not a game person on my phone. I don't like to play games on my phone when I'm out hunting because I use my phone for a lot of navigating. I don't want to drain the battery, but I know people do that. But with that being said, the days are so short, right? At that point, I think sunrise is around like 8:15, something like that, and sunsets, shoot, somewhere between 4:45 and 5:15, something like that. So your days are a lot shorter. And you do have days where it's sitting and glassing, and then you have days that are go, 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 because there are so many deer and elk in that country. It's less consistent for sure. I love archery for that reason, is it is go, 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 and you're not spending as much time kind of, you know, sitting and glassing as much. But I don't know, bring a buddy that you like talking to. That's my other piece of advice: a book and a buddy you like talking to. I just was reading on this last elk hunt a book about mountain men, and so I try to find a book that kind of connects to whatever landscape that I'm in. That's also great. So if you're in the breaks, there's a few really good books about that country that would bring the landscape to life. In the chat, somebody said, yeah, that's a great question, Will. Thanks for asking that. So in my experience, the crowds tend to kind of focus on certain areas that have become more well known. And so I think, me personally, I think if you're looking to go archery hunt, find the spots that everybody's talking about on social media and on Hunt Talk and Go Hunt, and then go to the other spots, because there are some areas that get a lot of attention, but there's enough country that you can get away from it. I've never felt like there's been too much pressure in the areas where I go. I look for, the other thing I do is I look for little sections where not a lot of people can congregate, where, you know, it might be, you know, 5 to 10 sections, and focus on that and bounce from, you know, section to section. In the wintertime, there's way less people out there, in my opinion. So I would say, if you want to go hunt the breaks, if you're open to not archery hunting it, go in the wintertime. Just the weather and the shorter hours keep people away. Yeah, I think you're going to see with the revisions to the elk management plan, a lot of that pressure alleviated. I think there's going to be some changes to the way tags are allocated that are going to help eliminate some of the pressure. I don't know per se what those are going to be, but I've been having conversations with people about how do we disperse the pressure so that people have a better experience. We're not draining the resource, i.e. running elk to death, and yeah, keep the habitat intact. I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but that's what I got for you there.
Any other questions from the audience out there? We still have a few more minutes before we lose Marcus to 7 o'clock, so feel free to jump in.
When you get to timber pockets, are you kind of still hunting like you might around, in the big belts or something where you're a few steps, you're looking, glassing, you're trying to, but you're still moving through it, even though it's really slow? Or are you actually, you come to a timber spot, say in the middle of the day in the breaks, are you just setting up at a edge of it where you can glass a little bit and you're just waiting because it's so small and you're just gonna watch for an hour or two?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, yeah, let's use this picture as an example. So if I was hunting this area, because I had a map, I know that there's not any trees on the other side of this. That's open on the other side of this. This is a pretty isolated timber pocket. On the other side, there's a little knob that you can sit on. So I would just sit basically where I am in this photo and glass down into that timber and just pick that apart. So you could, you could definitely go down there, but because it's so small, you're probably going to blow anything out before you can get too far through it. So what I would do, me personally, is just be as patient as possible and just watch. Kind of like in archery season, at some point, animals are going to come out to stretch their legs, get some sun, move around a little bit. And you just want to be as patient as possible and wait for that movement. Worst case scenario, they're going to go out the other side and you're going to see them as they go out the other side. And then at least you know they were there.
I'm hearing a lot about patience. I feel like I'd be blowing stuff out left and right, but
this presentation is a do as I say, not as I do presentation, folks. Yeah, it's hard. It's probably the hardest part about hunting is that patience component. I'm gonna give that back. Yeah, I just will wrap this up by saying I love the breaks. It's an incredible place. I really appreciate the friends and the friends of the friends that help keep the friends in business. And I hope that we can all do our part to make sure that this place stays the wild and scenic place that it is for decades to come, because I definitely want to be going here till I'm too old to walk. So thank you, Michaela, for having me and for all the work that you and your organization do.
Thank you so much, Marcus, for that whole presentation. I myself have never been hunting in the breaks, so I feel like I learned a lot. Maybe if I ever get out there one of these days. But I also want to extend just a big thank you to MWF and all the work that you guys do. They are a huge partner for us and help us out with a lot of work that we do, both on the ground and advocacy-wise. We actually just had one of MWF's staff out helping us water cottonwoods last week, and then kind of leading the charge on a lot of advocacy work for our region. So it's huge to have them kind of paving the way for us. And we're a really small organization, and being able to, like Marcus said, collaborate with each other is just, it makes an immense difference when we have so many organizations working towards the same goals and with just the same passions. So thank you again, Marcus. Thank you, MWF, for that presentation and for your work. And make sure you go and you can revisit this video. It is going to be posted on YouTube. So if you want to check out any of those links that Marcus was mentioning in the beginning, you can rewatch the video and check those out to do the elk survey, check out that elk management plan that's come out, and then look at all of our other past Tune In Tuesdays as well in preparation for our next one coming up. Marcus, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I was just going to say two quick things before you. Oh, and shoot, that was weird. I dropped my Instagram handle. If folks have more questions about hunting, you can definitely reach me by my email. but Instagram, I respond pretty quickly to. I'd love to give you any kind of help that I can. And then I also just want to point out that Joe Offer copied my mustache, and I just want that on the record.
Well, rather than muting myself. Anyway, sorry, I got distracted. My computer's opening up other programs. Yeah, so well, thank you again, everybody. And like Marcus said, if you have additional questions, reach out to him, reach out to us at the Friends, visit our website, MissouriBreaks.org. You can find out about the breaks, about us, get connected, get involved with our organization and with our partners, and find out ways that you can help and protect the Upper Missouri River Breaks National Monument. But with that, I will say goodnight to everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll hopefully see you next time.